Thank you for coming this morning. I'm sure you are aware there is a vote, so I may stop mid and do my vote. Bonjour tout le monde. Allô, bonne journée. Merci de venir. Thank you for coming. I would like to thank you for joining us on this historic day, an incredibly important day for many First Nations across this country. Merci d'être avec nous. J'aimerais remercier tous mes collègues qui sont présents aujourd'hui. J'aimerais aussi remercier les membres du caucus, Indigenous caucus, qui ont vraiment démontré beaucoup de support pour le processus. Your presence here truly matters to me. Today, we are reflecting a shared understanding that communities need, should, and will have access to clean water. This is not just abstract policy. This is about the people that we are serving. This is also about dignity and the future that we are building together. First, I want to share a little bit about water and ceremony. Water is truly sacred. It is the living being. It is a living being with its own spirit. It sustains our communities, it supports our health, and it carries life that brings forward every generation. Because of this sacred relationship, protecting water is not simply an environmental responsibility, it is also a spiritual duty and a way of honoring the interconnectedness of all living things. Today is about realizing a reality where children can drink safely from the tap, where families can trust the water in their homes, and where communities have the opportunities that they deserve. Malheureusement, ça c'est pas toujours une réalité pour certaines familles et certains enfants des Premières Nations. C'est pourquoi cette journée, il est si important de faire ce travail. I can speak to the significance of water. I'm from the Cree First Nation of Waswanipi. I know the importance of protecting it, and I know the importance of losing it. I grew up in a nation that tasked me with the duty of ensuring that every time we needed fresh water, I was sent with a bucket and a small gopigan, a small pot, where we would collect water and bring it back to our camp. This was a communal affair. It helped ensure that my grandmother had water to cook, clean, and even bathe. Because of my upbringing, I know full well the importance of having clean water. Nous travaillons pour un avenir pour chaque famille qui pourra ouvrir le robinet à la maison et d'avoir confiance que l'eau qui coulera sera propre et sécuritaire. That's why it's an honor for me today to table C-37 this morning, the First Nations Clean Water Act. This legislation will advance the critical work of addressing long-term drinking water advisories, and I'm grateful to do this work for and with First Nations. We can all agree that everyone should have access to clean, safe drinking water, no matter where they live. Across Canada, there are laws and regulations that set minimum standards for drinking water. But in First Nations communities, there is not. This legislative gap that impacts only First Nations people is unacceptable and must be addressed. C'est pourquoi j'ai présenté la loi le C-37 aujourd'hui. In 2013, Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act was never fully implemented because it was rejected by First Nations. First Nations opposed the act because it imposed too high standards without providing the essential tools, resources, and infrastructure needed to actually meet them. It was ultimately repealed in 2022 as a requirement of the 2021 Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Class Action Settlement Agreement. The agreement also included a commitment to co-develop replacement legislation with First Nations. Nous avons l'opportunité de mettre en place un cadre législatif moderne et efficace pour de l'eau potable dans les Premières Nations, un cadre conclu avec elles. C-37 is grounded in the spirit that First Nations have an inherent right to self-government over water, and that access to safe, clean drinking water and reliable drinking water should be supported through legally recognized First Nations water rights, source water protection, and a commitment to sustainable federal funding. Since 2015, the federal government supported First Nations in lifting 156 long-term drinking water advisories and preventing 334 short-term drinking water advisories from becoming long-term. Nous avons aussi levé tous les avis à long terme sur la qualité d'eau au Québec, en Alberta, en Colombie-Britannique et dans les provinces atlantiques. Nous avons augmenté les investissements de près de 300% par rapport au gouvernement Harper et nous avons un plan d'équiper en place pour les avis qui restent. The results have been quite significant in the work that we've done. Let me list a few examples. Star Blanket Cremation in July of 2024 marked the end of a 17-year drinking water advisory with the opening of a new state-of-the-art water plant. In Manitoba, Barons River First Nations lifted its long-term drinking water advisory earlier this year after completing upgrades to the water treatment plant. A few weeks ago, Okanese First Nations and Saskatchewan reached an important milestone by lifting its long-term drinking water advisory. These are stories of persistence, leadership, and hope. These are also human stories. Des histoires d'enfance des Premières Nations qui ont plus besoin de mettre leur manteau de l'hiver pour aller chercher de l'eau pour prendre un bain et une réalité. Today, there are 36 remaining First Nations with long-term drinking water advisories. We know that is 36 too many. This important legislation recognizes First Nations as stewards of water, establishes clear standards, and reflects the realities of their communities. The proposed First Nations Clean Water Act is backed with the single largest funding commitment ever made for First Nations, $4.6 billion over 5 years. The strength of this legislation lays in how its key components work together. Investments in infrastructure, support for operators, source water protection, and strong standards are designed to reinforce one another and deliver lasting results for First Nations communities. Ce loi a été créée aussi avec des obligations permanentes. Elle établit des responsabilités claires et engage 7 gouvernements ainsi que les gouvernements futurs à continuer de progresser l'accès à l'eau potable. At the heart of this legislation is a simple principle. Every person deserves access to safe drinking water. The proposed First Nations Clean Water Act advances the progressive realizations of human right to safe drinking water on First Nations lands. La réalisation progressive d'un droit humain à l'eau potable pour les Premières Nations ne repose pas sur une seule mesure, mais sur l'ensemble de cette loi. C-37 takes action through the core principles of the bill to address urgent needs in community, improve access to safe drinking water, and show steady and timely progress. The bill also enables the co-development of a funding framework, closes the regulatory gap, establishes minimum standards, and affirms First Nations rights. Together, these measures advance the progressive realization of the human right to safe drinking water by embedding it in law and creating a practical framework that meets communities where they are at. This funding attached to this legislation builds on a foundation established by the former bill, C-61. By pairing a comprehensive legislative framework with the resources needed to implement it over the long term. Sustainable access to clean drinking water does not succeed with one-time investments. It requires reliable long-term funding. Les systèmes d'eau ont besoin de stabilité et d'un engagement à long terme. C'est pourquoi notre gouvernement s'engage à investir 4,6 milliards de dollars supplémentaires sur les 5 ans pour assurer l'accès à l'eau potable des Premières Nations. Il s'agit d'un investissement le plus important dans l'histoire dans ce domaine. Combined with $2.3 billion in investment in Budget 2025, the Carney government has now committed half of the $14 billion invested in clean drinking water for First Nations since 2015, this past year alone. In about half of the communities where long-term advisory remains, there's a completed water treatment plant. The challenges in lifting those advisories revolve around operational issues. That's why we are increasing funding to ensure communities have the capacity to operate and maintain their systems over long term. Furthermore, this proposed legislation commits the federal government to working with First Nations to co-develop a funding framework that reflects their priorities and their realities. Les communautés savent qu'elles ont besoin de quoi. C'est pourquoi elles doivent guider les décisions futures. The bill commits Canada to take concrete steps to provide adequate and sustainable funding for water services on First Nations lands. First Nations knowledge and leadership are essential for strong water systems. This bill puts that leadership at its center. It affirms that First Nations' inherent right to self-determination includes control over decisions on water and related infrastructure on their lands. This critical step clarifies roles, strengthens accountability, and provides greater certainty for communities. This legislation will establish clear minimum standards for drinking water and wastewater on First Nations lands. It will ensure that drinking water meets the guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality and that wastewater meets the standards set out in the federal wastewater system's effluent regulations or applicable provincial or territorial standards. In addition, we support the development of regulations in consultations with First Nations governing bodies. Together, these steps will help expand access to clean, safe drinking water and strengthen the protection of source water while respecting First Nations jurisdiction over water and wastewater. First Nations have been clear that protecting water starts with protecting the sources of that water. Rivers, lakes, and streams do not stop at lines drawn on a map. La loi de C-37 aide à définir les rôles et confirme le droit inhérent des Premières Nations à prendre des décisions sur l'eau sur leur territoire. For water adjacent to First Nations lands, the bill creates a regulatory pathway for First Nations, Canada, and provinces and territories to enter into voluntary agreements that outline how to protect those sources of water beyond reserved lands. It's critical that we ensure source water protection is in this legislation, but we must also ensure that we are constructively working together with provinces and territories to conclude trilateral agreements. We believe that this strikes the right balance while also ensuring that this legislation can truly stand the test of time. Cette approche établit un bon équilibre et nous permettons de bâtir une loi qui va produire des résultats durables. First Nations communities have been waiting far too long for serious legislation to address the regulatory gap and clean drinking water issues in their communities. Just like everything else our government is doing, we know that working together can accomplish great things. Canada is a country that is truly a water superpower. We owe it to the future generations and the youth of communities to ensure that they can too benefit from an irreplaceable resource. To strengthen First Nations governance over water, this bill will help establish a First Nations Water Commission. Ce projet de loi va aussi permettre de créer une commission de l'eau pour les Premières Nations. First Nations priorities will ultimately inform the mandate of the commission, backed by federal funding to implement the terms of reference. We envision this as a trusted First Nations-led organization that will provide technical expertise, capacity support, and guidance tailored to communities' needs. The proposed legislation reflects more than 6 years of engagement and consultation with First Nations, as well as a careful parliamentary study. I've had important conversations on this bill with First Nations leaders this past year, and we've had the opportunity to continue working together while it goes through the parliamentary process. Bill C-37 builds on the substantial time and effort put into the former Bill C-61, legislation that truly put First Nations voices at the forefront. Le projet de loi propose les résultats de plus de 6 années de discussions et consultations avec les Premières Nations. Depuis que je suis ministre, j'ai entendu directement des chefs, des opérateurs de l'eau, des experts, des aînés et des membres des communautés qui veut voir cette loi avancer. Today marks a defining moment, one where change is not only possible but within reach. I also want to be honest about a difficult reality. Water is constantly moving. It can be affected by events that are sometimes beyond our control. This means that as we introduce this important legislation and work to lift advisories as quickly as possible, we know that new advisories may still occur. Our shared goal is to ensure that communities have the tools, resources, protections, and support that they need to prevent advisories where possible and respond quickly and effectively when they do arise. This legislation is a crucial step, one that also creates a framework that reflects First Nations priorities, respects self-determination, and helps ensure that future generations can turn on the tap in their home with confidence. Ce projet de loi ferme les lacunes réglementaires importantes avec des standards minimums, prévoit un financement robuste à long terme et reconnaît la gouvernance de l'eau dirigée par les Premières Nations. These steps hold this government and all future governments to making steady, strong progress on the human right to safe drinking water on First Nations lands. Bill C-37 is a historic step forward. Together, we are building a future where clean drinking water flows for every person in Canada, in every First Nations community, every day. Merci, miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time for questions, so thanks for the clapping. Yesterday, you made an interesting comment. You said when you spoke to First Nations leadership in context of drug emergencies, that the big issue for them was capital requests for treatment centers. Can I ask you in this as well, as far as we know about a lot of the long-term advisory problems, it's not so much the government buying new pipes and pumps, it's about operator support, operator training, and getting people to stay in the community once they've had that training. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on how this legislation will train more operators and keep them there?
Sure. I just want to speak a little bit on some of the facts that you raised about operators. They are a critical function in the system. I had the opportunity earlier this year to address a video just acknowledging their work because it is very important. I was very pleased to have one of the operators who gave me a lift somewhere actually say it's the first time in all my time as an operator that a minister has acknowledged my work. And I think that this is what we have to pay attention to, that we are doing multiple projects in community, over 1,200 water and wastewater systems that we work with. There's 1,600 projects that are under design and construction, and that there are 750 complete. We have 584 community-based water monitors, and we have 144 environmental public health officers. We know that all of these individuals are critical to the system. You can build a water plant, unless you have staff that are there to operate it, you will fall under a long-term boil water advisory if that person is not there for the long term. So this funding, I think, is going to be one of the places where we have the opportunity to ensure that individuals that are in training have the skill set, have the tools that they need that are going to be necessary to operate the systems that are in place. But it's also going to be, I think, an exercise in understanding what is that transition process? What are people going on to? What are the frustration? I think the majority of the things that they are waiting for in these roles is really the funding that is attached to this legislation that is going to allow for us to do the work that we need to do in community. My hopes is that it's going to be as soon as possible, that we are going to be able to undertake the parliamentary process in a way that we can ensure that the law is passed in a timely fashion.
Did you cave to provincial pressure on recognizing rights in the bill?
No, I think one of the important things that I want to point out today is when C-61 was undertaken, the desire to ensure that source water, including outside of community territories, was incorporated. We still included that. For me, it's ensuring the bill will stand the test of time, that we have provincial partners at the table, that we're speaking not only about source water, but that we're also incorporating important work done under the nature strategy, which talks about water security on a national scale. I think these two are complementary. The trilateral process is ensuring that we're not only working on source water protection in and adjacent to reserve lands, but that we're also undertaking a national strategy and really protecting a resource that we have in this country.
Can you clarify then, why did you change the wording? Your Liberal platform says you will immediately introduce and pass legislation affirming the First Nations have a human right to clean drinking water. A year later, you introduced the bill again only after you were taken to court, and the wording is clearly different. You're saying you will work towards a progressive ideal of advancing a human right. That's not the same thing as saying they have a human right.
Yeah.
Why was the wording changed?
The progressive realization to the human right to water is in the bill. The progressive realization refers to us knowing and understanding that in all of the First Nations across Canada, not everybody is starting in the same place. And we are acknowledging that we support communities from wherever their start line is. There are some high-capacity communities that will reach that space
Why
right
did you
away.
change the words
And
for that?
I'm explaining that there are some communities that will have lower capacity and will need that additional support. So the progressive realization is acknowledging that we have multiple paths to walk on. We are supporting communities with multiple measures, and that is to be progressively realized. I think that's the important part for me as a minister, is really respecting the space of the work that we're doing in and not treating all of the communities that we work with as having a one-size-fits-all solution.
You don't agree that it's not. You don't agree that it's not progressive, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Je pense que l'important, I have my phone open. L'importance de la discussion aujourd'hui, c'est on a ajouté la réalisation progressive sur l'eau parce que on sait que pas toutes les communautés ont les mêmes besoins, ne sont pas toutes dans la même place. Il va y avoir certaines communautés qui sont vraiment aux capacités, qui vont avancer dans le processus très vite, mais il va y avoir aussi des communautés qui ont vraiment besoin de beaucoup plus de support. C'est pour ça qu'on travaille avec eux où ils commencent et on va les amener à la ligne finale d'avoir à tenir leurs besoins pour leur communauté dans le progrès qui reflète leur réalité.
There's a group of MPs who are funneling in and out. I know they have to vote. It's very noticeable that there's no First Nations leaders who are standing beside you. What are we supposed to glean from that, given that when Minister Haidu came, it was this huge celebration, chiefs were happy. Why aren't they here today standing beside you?
Thank you for the question. I've had a lot of conversations with leadership in the past few days. Many of the individuals that were at the last session are now in Assembly this week, could not be present. Many, I think you'll see, will be echoing the statement that we're putting out today. I'm not here to bring leadership for the photo op pic. I'm here to have leadership share this space and acknowledge this bill in the place that they want to address it.
But they're upset about the right language being changing. They're saying that source water protections are being watered down. Like, I don't understand what we're supposed to make of this here.
I mean, I think that's the interpretation that you have on the bill. My conversations with leadership and the chiefs that have spoken to me understand that we are trying to pass a bill that is going to be protected and stand the test of time. I'm not trying to put a bill forward that is going to be challenged. I'm trying to put a bill forward that partners, PTs, provinces and territories feel can advance, that they can work with us. I think introducing the collaborative aspect of how that work is undertaken is important. This is not about passing legislation that you're going to impose on communities. This is about passing legislation that is going to create a clear pathway for people to work together and truly understand the reality of First Nations communities.
Can you clarify how?
I'm just going to vote.
Yeah. Okay. Did chiefs agree to those changes? Did you consult on that change?
This is very awkward for me.
Can you clarify exactly how this bill works to protect source water flowing into First Nations, not just water that exists on the community or underneath it? Can you just spell that out for us?
Good, thank you. Sorry, can you repeat the first part of your question?
Yeah, how exactly does this bill protect source water flowing into First Nations, not just water that exists in the communities or flowing underneath it?
The importance of water, first we have to acknowledge that it is not stagnant, that it moves around. And for water that flows near, in, and under First Nations communities, the jurisdiction for federal lands is very clear. For water that is adjacent or flowing in and out, I think that the important part of the work that we're undertaking is that partners and territories understand that they also have a role to play. Because protecting water, source water, is not just for First Nations people. It's for all Canadians that live across the country. For me, I think the space that we were in politically as a country when C-61 was put forward, a little bit different today. One of the other things that I'm very supportive of is in the nature strategy, really that security, that national water security strategy that's being put forward is a double process that really ensures that everybody who's impacted by water in this country participates in the ensuring that we are having a comprehensive, harmonized approach to protecting water in its entirety. I don't want to see patchwork source water protection. I want to see all water protected and harmonized in an approach that's going to ensure we protect this resource for Canadians.
I just want to clarify. So, is it correct to understand that the changes from the language in the platform to what we see in the bill is because you felt that that language in the platform would have opened this bill up to court challenges from provinces and territories? And to my colleague's question about the changing political landscape of the reason that the language in this bill is different, what has changed in the political landscape to not be able to say access to clean drinking water is a First Nations right, full stop?
What has changed for me as a minister is really ensuring that I am trying to think 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future. What does that look like? Ensuring that First Nations have not only drafted and defined the methodology, the regulations, the collaborative process, really, for me, creates the portrait of a future where partners and territories are participating in that process. And I think that, in the past, and even in some instances today, there's always been that challenge of trying to understand First Nations rights. This is one of the spaces where I think if we truly want to protect First Nations rights at a federal level, at a provincial level, territorial level, even at a municipal level, we have to do that work together. The best work to protect water in its entirety, source and otherwise, is done when everybody sits at the table, works together, has an equal voice, commits and participates in the process. I think that removes all challenges.
So was it because of the court challenge,
No.
potential court challenge? That I'm trying to understand, why did the wording from the platform change to what the bill is now?
Because I felt that it would stand the test of time, that you wouldn't have a court challenge.
But what does
that
test
you
of
wouldn't-
time mean?
That's what it means, that you would not have additional court challenges by those partners that were actually put in a position where their jurisdiction was questioned or challenged. I'm trying to create the safest space where everybody comes to the table, works together, and commits in its entirety. I'm not going to protect water here and have a different protection mechanism here. I'm trying to create the most protection, the pathway of water.
Is it not that the BC court cases on Cowichan and Drippa actually have put a chill, and you are softening the language so that it cannot have the same force of the human right that we see in BC that has caused so many concerns? Because that's what experts are saying. The analysis of the change is not that it will lead to court challenges, it's that it protects you from preventing, for example, or it protects you from an impasse between economic development and protecting this human right, because it does not just declaratively make it a human right, it talks about it as a goal to work towards.
No, that is not my goal. That is not my understanding. That's not the position that I took. For me, I'm doing a double role. I am helping First Nations have the space, have the resource, have the mechanism so that they can protect in their communities, in their lands, and ensure that they're also working with those who live in and around those territories so that they also have protection to water. First Nations water doesn't only stay within community territorial boundaries. It flows everywhere. We have the work of also uplifting those that we live with so that they can have protection as well. I see this as a pathway where we are not only the stewards of protecting water for ourselves, but for everybody who lives in this country. And I think the thing for me in this bill that is so significant is we're not just making these statements. This bill has funding attached to it that's going to help communities achieve that. When we benefit, we bring those benefits to others.
Disent par rapport au changement. Qu'est-ce qu'on vous a dit dans vos consultations par rapport au changement pour la réalisation progressive?
Merci.
Qu'est-ce que les chefs vous disent?
J'ai parlé avec plusieurs chefs. La plupart des chefs ont compris que pour nous, la manière de vraiment prendre acknowledgement, de voir que le processus qu'eux ils ont besoin de faire pour atteindre la qualité d'eau dans leur communauté, c'est là où on va travailler avec eux. Je ne suis pas là pour faire une approche one size fits all pour tout le monde. Je suis là avec travailler avec les communautés pour accélérer leurs besoins pour leurs membres. On sait qu'il y a vraiment beaucoup de différences entre les communautés. Les besoins sont différents. La manière qu'ils ont de l'accès à l'eau est différente. La manière qu'ils construisent un système est différente. C'est pour ça, moi, je crois dans le langage, la progressive réalisation d'un processus. C'est connu, c'est dans d'autres aspects internationaux avec le UN. Je suis supportive du processus. Puis, tous les chefs que j'ai parlé avec, par téléphone, par texto, on réfléchit que, oui, la réalité de la première fois qu'on a essayé de passer ces 61 est différente de le temps que nous sommes dans maintenant.
You don't want the bill to be challenged. First Nations leaders have been asking for the reintroduction of the previous bill for well over a year. Why change the bill? Why introduce these changes, these, as we're saying, as my colleague was saying, what chiefs are arguing, weakened down aspects of it? Why not just reintroduce this previous bill that, frankly, did not pass because of filibustering in the House?
Well, you know, I think that for me, really trying to get this process right, listen to the people that I'm working with, listen to the people that I'm working for, getting their feedback. Their feedback was, get this bill to pass. Get this bill in a place where it's not challenged. Get this bill in a place where we can be involved in the process. And many leaders have also asked me to get this bill in a place where we can work with provincial governments, with territorial governments, so that we can have a conversation amongst ourselves.
So to that part of that, are you asking, just to clarify, I want the follow-up, please. Just to clarify, are you saying when you don't want it challenged, you don't want it challenged by the oppositional parties who have been actually supporting First Nations legislation this term, or you don't want it to be opposed by Ontario and Alberta, who were far more interested in it blocking economic development last time?
I am going to respond to that question that, yes, ideally, I would like the opposition to work with us. I think they've been very clear on that position. I think they'll be supportive. I also think that right now, the space, the time that we're in as a country, it is essential to have provinces and territories work with us. I also want to ensure that it's understood that the people that will benefit from this bill, First Nations communities, are also going to bring forward benefits to those who live around them. It is for everybody to ensure that we have resource available, protected, that we have everybody being part of that planning, and that the commitment is long-term. And the difference between that bill and this bill is really the funding that's going to unlock what communities need to do, the work that they need to do. It's an essential space right now. I've had the opportunity to visit communities that are waiting for this money to flow. I can, primary example, visiting Cache, visiting Shishawat. They are the community that will benefit from this process. So I think that, yes, while I am anticipating and wanting, quick progression, I'm also there to listen to how we can improve. That's work that we'll do through the parliamentary process. As a first-time MP and minister, I'm excited to do that work, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank you.
Leaders on the language of that change?